So this is just a quick video about my second ever piece of hi-fi that I bought, Pioneer F99X tuner. So this was released I think in '85. I remember seeing a What Hi-Fi magazine where it was announced and reviewed. A very good review. At the time it was way out of my price range. I could only dream of owning one, but a few years later I managed to pick one up in Preston. It was an X-display model. I think it might have been like £180 or something back in, I don't know, 87, 88 maybe, something like that. So I've had it ever since, and it's been pretty reliable. Made a few minor repairs, but I'll just take you through operation and what it's got. So nice LED display here, perhaps not quite as impressive as the electroluminescent displays, but on the other hand those tend to fade over time with continuous use, at least, whereas the LEDs of course are sort of almost indestructible in normal use. So it's good and bright. It's not perfect though. In low light there's no filter, and so it tends to get a bit washed out, and again in very bright light with the sun on it, it becomes a little bit difficult to read. We've got the green LEDs here, signal strength meter, and stereo indicator here. The red light here is the opposite of the green light here, which is the FM bandwidth. So when FM wide is on, the narrow light goes out. So it's a bit redundant having lights that show the opposite setting. Well, as indeed the power light is, of course, redundant, since there's always some lights on it. But there you go. So you've got manual tuning, automatic tuning, if under normal circumstances, and manual with that on, and that also turns off the mute. Unfortunately, you've got no way of defeating the stereo. So if you've got a weak station that's only just on the borderline of bringing stereo, you can't defeat it to get a low noise, and sometimes it will just hunt, picking up stereo and dropping off every few seconds, or every fraction of a second even, and you can't really do anything other than maybe detune very slightly, which knocks out the stereo and hopefully is not going to pick up any interference from an adjacent station. So that's the only thing you can do, I found. But having said that, the whole unit is very sensitive, certainly for the time. I'll show you the specs with the service manual a bit later. The tuning, the tuning presets here. You've got two banks with that to change the banks. One of the things I'm going to have to do, that button is a little bit flaky there, so I think I'm going to have to contact clean these switches. But it's a very good tuner. Certainly on FM. The IF bandwidth is slightly better on wide, but even on narrow, it's a very good tuner. Very low noise floor, particularly with a good signal, but good sounding. Maybe a slight bass roll off, not heavy on the bass. But still sounds very sweet on a good uncompressed FM signal, so Radio 3, that's classic FM, that kind of thing. AM is interesting also, because it is unusual that it has a very wide bandwidth. So that's good if you are wanting to pick up a music station on AM, although there aren't many of those around these days. Maybe Radio Caroline 648, but yeah, so unusually wide AM bandwidth. So for good, relatively good AM top end, but of course that means that it's much more prone to interference, particularly at night. It on most stations it's almost it was almost unusable, with so many foreign stations adjacent to the one you wanted to listen to typically. Okay, so that's the front. I have seen most of them online with wooden panels, but mine didn't come with it. I don't know whether that was because this was a display model or what, or whether it's just a variant. So on the back, standard 75 ohm unbalanced FM, the AM loop antenna, a fairly cheap thing. The plastic stands are broken, so it falls over, but usual kind of cheap thing. And your standard audio output there. So nothing particularly exciting on the back. I did have to replace these. These broke a few years ago, but quite amazingly, I managed to find I forget where it was, Maplin or RS or something. Some spring clips which absolutely identically fitted the size and the PCB holes. So maybe there was one manufacturer that manufactured these things. I don't know. This is the service manual, and I thought I would show you some of the specifications. So as you can see, we've got very good sensitivity here, different ways of measuring for particular noise figures in mono and stereo. The signal to noise ratio, again we've got two different ways of measuring it. For DIN we've got 73 dB stereo, and for 80 dB femtowatt input signal, we're achieving 87 dB stereo and 94 dB in mono, which is really very impressive indeed. Distortion figures, very good, very low, particularly for wide IF setting, as you'd expect, but even in narrow, they're very good. Capture ratio 0.8 dB, which is very good. Selectivity 85 dB, excellent. Stereo separation 65 dB, which is very good for a tuner. Frequency response just 0.8 dB down at 15K. Image IF response ratios high, and yep, so that's all in all very good specs, and indeed it does sound very good and pulls in weak stations, and on narrow at least gives you good separation on the crowded London band with lots of pirates, other weekends at least. It's a very good tuner. So I've undone the 3 screws at the back and the plastic clips on the side, and here it is in all its glory. So you've got a very nice clean design, good quality components, good quality capacitors. What you might think of as some leaky capacitors actually isn't. It's glue to stop any vibrations moving them, so that's good. Got a couple of Toshiba chips, 3 proprietary Pioneer chips implementing the digital direct decoder 2, which I understand is a form of FM pulse counting into a DAC. Very good implementation anyway. I will describe some of the adjustments a bit later, I think. But one of the issues I had with it, and I'm assuming it was true of all the models, I mean all the examples of the model, was when you would use manual tuning and go up and down like this, it would take a very long time for the unmuting to the muting to release, and so you'd press the button, it would move the frequency, and then take a long time to actually hear the audio. And it wasn't uncommon back in those days that synthesizers would take a long while for the phase lock loop to settle. So that was kind of normal compared to the modern units. But this was like, I don't know, just over a second or something to give the audio. And I thought, this is ridiculous. So anyway, I found on the circuit, I don't know whether you can read or see here, but C519, which is 10 microfarad 50 volts in the circuit, part of the time constant for the muting. So I just changed that. This capacitor here is the one I changed down to from 10 to 1 microfarad, and it improved it dramatically, made it much more usable. I didn't even experiment with going any lower. It was just okay for my purposes. So you could even experiment with different values. Okay, so one thing I will do, I'll need to take off the screws at the sides here and remove this this front panel comes forward. So I want to show you the buttons. Those had felt pads which were replaced, and as I said before, I'll need to put some contact cleaner on at least that switch. Just a note here, you can see on the circuit board there's some option here that isn't fitted. I don't quite know what all of these are. It's a record level marked here. I don't know what that's for. But I did see on the circuit there's an option for AM stereo out, which I think is probably that point there. That was never, as far as I know, ever broadcast in the UK. I think it was in the US. But I don't really know what these two and the rest of the circuit options are for. So with the screws removed, the cover comes off very easily. We can see the switches here, little tiny switches with the epoxy I put on there to make them stand a little bit prouder. So they connect with the plastic plungers here, which again I've put some epoxy on. I might look at removing those, maybe putting some silicone on, and maybe oiling some of the moving parts here, just very slightly. There's those there, and maybe the rockers for the switches there, to make them move a little bit more easily. And then those switches I want to contact clean, so I think I will look at maybe removing this PCB so I can get a bit better access inside there. So I've replaced the dabs of epoxy on the front panel with the white silicone you can see here, and lubricated these points, all the moving bits of the buttons, with a tiny bit of oil in each point, so they move a little more smoothly. And then on the actual button here that was missing, I put a bit more epoxy on, so those are all now standing a bit proud, and they should make contact very easily. And so I'll put the front panel on. So here's some information about how to adjust the AM section. So as you can see, we've got high end and low end of the band adjustments on to each trimmers, and with particular voltages described here. And here we've got test points to take the voltages off, and the transformers and trimmers, trimmer capacitors here. So looking at the board here, we can identify them here and here. So first thing to say is use a ceramic screwdriver or plastic like this, never a metal one for these ferrite cores on the transformers. If you do, you will have a very high likelihood that they will just split the ferrite and it'll get stuck. So the adjustments here, the low frequency and high frequency end, adjust the position of the frequency, how accurate the display is, so it'll tend to shift high and low around the top and the low end of the bands. I found this one easy to adjust. This one was very sensitive, so I used the voltages as or the voltage as described here for that high end. This one wasn't very critical. I found it just as easy, if not more easy, to tune to a station on the low end of the band and make sure that was centered. And then obviously we check the similar station at the high end of the band after adjusting that as well. These two here, these seem to adjust like a pre-scaler, or not shifting the frequency but shifting the resonant part of the filter for the amplifier, so that effectively adjusts the signal strength for the top end of the band and the low end of the band respectively. So again, I really used the top end and low end stations and maximized their signal strength, minimizing any interference from adjacent channels, and found that the easiest way to adjust those. So that's the only adjustment really for the AM section. So we'll now look at the FM section. So this is the FM adjustment section. So the first bit is relatively easy. So we just need to measure two voltages at the high and low end of the band, and there's one adjustment core, L4. So that is the adjustment. Now I didn't need to make any adjustments, so that's the test point 16, and that's the low end of the band, which should be 8 volts, which it is, and it was bang on 24.5 for the high end at 108 megahertz. So I didn't need to make any changes there. So the next adjustment here for these two frequencies, we've got 3 adjustments here and then 3 adjustments below, and maximizing the voltage on the pin 22. So if we look at the locations of those, it's these for one setting and those for the other frequency setting. So identifying them here on the board, we've got these cores and then these capacitive trimmers here. So the cores I found very difficult to move. This and this wouldn't really move with the adjusters I'd got. This one did move. It wasn't very critical. Didn't seem to make much difference. Similarly, these were not really very important, I don't think. So no great change there. So at 98 megahertz, we've got 3 transformer cores to adjust signal, or voltage rather, on 22. So on the circuit, it's this one, and this one over here. They moved quite freely, but made very little difference. I think this one I adjusted a little bit to slightly tweak from what it was, but it didn't really change very much. This adjustment here, I tuned to a station as near to 98 as I could and adjusted, so we've got it's near to 0 volts on, well, the difference between these two pins here after adjusting this core is quite sensitive. It's quite sensitive to adjust, so it makes a big difference. But we are fairly close to 0 on that. So the final section of adjustments here, apart from the last one here with the muting, I can't really adjust in any sensible way. I don't want to do it by ear. I think I'll make things worse, and I just don't have the test equipment, the ability to look for the 19 kilohertz pilot tone, and the distortion meter I don't have. So if you do want to make a change, if you think you have a need to change, well, that's fine, go ahead. They're marked here and on the board here, left and right, and then here VCO pilot. But I'm not going to change anything, I don't think. I'll just keep it as it is. Sounds pretty good, and I'll just put the case on and call that a day.